Hi there folks, in this video we're going to dissect and then hopefully test fire this rather derelict looking 16 gauge shell. Now, this was found in my parents' basement a few days ago. I was helping my siblings clean up and move some things out of my parents' place, and my brother had found this lying around, so I took possession of it. Now my father had a 16 gauge shotgun, which he had when he was up north and so forth. So I'm not exactly sure of the date of this, but it's a paper Imperial 16 gauge shell, and I believe it's either from the 1950s or perhaps the early 1960s, because later on Imperial switched to plastic tubes. I'm not sure if that was the late 60s or early 70s they did that, but if you're an expert on such matters, be sure to chime in the comments below. Anyway, like I said, paper tube hull, quite effectively waterproofed. You can see the waterproofing compound on the paper tube. The paper tube is in really good shape, but the metal case head is quite heavily rusted, especially down by the primer. These were dipped in a product that CIL called Duco, I believe is what they called it. It's basically like a varnish or a shellac that they dipped the shells in. You can see how far up the dipping process went, because it's still, even the case is still shiny right up to there where the dipping spot ended, and then you can see it's a little tarnished here and quite corroded up above that. So I'm going to take some steel wool. We're going to try to clean some of the corrosion off that, just to see what it looks like underneath. All right, after a few minutes scrubbing with steel wool, we have managed to uncover the head stamp. You can see that says Imperial 16 and Canada. So still some corrosion left there, but I think that's about as far as we're going to go with it. One fairly bad spot right there, another one there. When you see a color change like that, you know that some of the material has actually been removed by the corrosion process, so that's more significant than just some staining. If this was a rifle cartridge, I would not fire anything that looked like that. That would be unsafe. With a shotgun, the rim really doesn't play a really large role in containing the firing of the cartridge, of the gases. Basically, the internal base wad is what keeps everything sealed up. So this is probably still safe enough to fire. It might potentially crack, but there really isn't any particular possibility of gas leaking out, because the base wad would seal the powder gases in, even if the rim does crack. So these are kind of an interesting cartridge case. They are actually steel reinforced inside. There is a fiber base wad and a steel cup inside these, and then the outside is the brass case head. So I'm going to go grab a magnet. We'll just show you that there is in fact some steel present in that. All right, we've got ourselves a magnet, small magnet, and as you can see, it is not attracted to the brass up here, but as we move down towards the bottom of the case where the steel cup is inserted to reinforce it, you can see that the magnet will stick to it there, and it will really stick to it on the flat base because the steel cup is underneath there. So these are a pretty strong case head design. These were not a cheap shell when they were on the market. They were sort of a premium one as far as Canadian made shells went. There were the cheaper Canuck brand shells, but these were the kind of high powered hunting shell. So steel reinforced, it still should be strong. But next we're going to pull this apart to see what's inside. Hopefully the moisture has been kept out by that water sealant. You can see a bit of discoloration in the center, so it is possible that moisture worked its way in through the very center of the fold, but we'll pull that apart and see what's going on inside. Next, we're going to get this crimp opened up, and one method that I've found to open the crimps up on shells is to just use a self-tapping wood screw and use that to open the crimp up. Usually one can get the crimp opened up without horribly mangling the shell so that it can be re-crimped. At least that's been my experience. So sorry about bumping the camera there. We're working with minimal equipment today. There we go. We've got the crimp loosened up. And hopefully we'll be able to re-crimp this after we're finished having a look at what's inside. So let's pour the shot out. And the shot looks pretty good. There's a little bit of oxidization on some of it. Yeah, it's kind of a mix. Some of the pellets are still shiny, like that one in the middle of the field, and then that one is rather oxidized. So I would say a little bit of moisture got inside, but it couldn't have been too terrible because we do have still some shiny pellets, and if there had been a lot of moisture in there, none of those would be still shiny and graphite colored. So that's a good sign. I'm going to go a little deeper in here. I'm going to go get another tool so I can iron that crimp out a little bit further so we can get in and pull out the wads. Alright, if we peer down inside that shell, you can barely see it, but there's a tan colored fiber wad down there. So we're going to use the old self-tapping screw trick again. Try to get that in roughly in the center of the wad. Center-ish anyway. And we can get a bit of a purchase on it. Hopefully we can pull it out without ruining it. Yep, seems to be moving. Getting it past the crimp might be a bit of a challenge though. Oops, keep bumping the camera. All right. You can see the hole in that right there. This is going to take me a little more work, and I'll get back to you as soon as I get it pulled free. Okay, I got myself a flashlight, so let's have a little better look inside this shell, see if we can illuminate that any better. You can see down there that the primer shows up as being nice and shiny, and although it doesn't show up really well, the inside of the cartridge case is nice and clean and does not appear to have ever gotten wet, so that's a good sign. I think this shell will go off. I don't think, based upon the condition of the primer inside, that really anything would have got into it to kill it off. So anyway, so that looks good. The powder looks good as well. Looks good. There's no off-putting odor off it, and it's a flake type powder, 26 grains in this shell. So it's probably in the speed range of something like Herco. Fairly slower, medium slower burning powder for a 16 gauge. The shot, there was 498.3 grains, which is just a few grains over 1 1/8 of an ounce. And then the final things that were in the shell were 2 of these 1/4 inch fiber wads and a nitro card or nitro wad hard card, and this is 0.125 of an inch thick. So this would go right over the powder. The fiber wads would go over that, and the shots on top of that. Anyway, after having examined everything, I'm going to put this all back together in the reloading press and recrimp it, and then we'll take it out and see if it fires. All right, got all the components put back in the shell and recrimped. The varnish kind of breaks up when you recrimp it, so that's why it looks a little brown and flaky. So the waterproofness, whatever it used to have, is probably ruined by that whole process. But anyway, we got her all back together. So the next step is to take it out to the range and see if it fires. All right, we've got our crappy old 16 gauge shell and a 16 gauge shotgun. Let's see if this thing will go off. Alright, I am back from the range, and here we have the fired shell. My camera cut out partway through filming, but I believe it did capture this shell going off. And I must say the shell fired with full power. There was no hint of anything being anything but a full power discharge. So we'll have a good look at the fired case. You can see that there is a small crack there in the brass, and another small crack there. But they don't go down very far. They're just at this thin portion up at the top. So we do have those stress signs. The tube itself, though, appears to have survived without any issues. It doesn't split. That line in it there is just the end of the paper tube when they roll it over. So no particular issues there. So anyway, we got a good firing pin strike. I've got my 16 gauge press off camera here, so I'm going to run the shell up into that, and we'll have a look at what the primer looks like. I can get it pressed out. So there is the primer that came out of that. You can see how nasty and crappy it looks out there. However, the corrosion doesn't go very far up. A little bit of corrosion around the bottom, but the rest of it is nice and shiny. You might note that these are kind of a short primer. They are the same diameter as a standard 209 primer, but CIL used quite a bit shorter battery cup, so these are kind of an abbreviated looking thing compared to the standard modern 209. So here's the shell with the primer popped out. Yeah, you can see the corrosion went a little ways up in there, but anyway, it stayed weather tight. Anyway, this is a good kind of video to do when you have ammo high prices and shortages, because you can do a whole video on one old free shell. How's that for making the most of the worst thing? Anyway, thanks for watching, guys, and we'll talk to you in the next one.